Oh, hey Scott, how are you today?
Fantastic. How are you?
I am actually fabulous, thank you. It's been a really, really good week and the sun is shining, so what is there to complain about? Uh, well, the first question that I ask everybody is how do you like your coffee in the morning?
Hot and black. Dark, nothing in it, and very hot.
Now, this is my prediction because I just told you just before the pre-calling this has become my little experiment question of just fascination about patterns and behaviors in people. Now, am I predicting if we're going to go hot, we're going to go fast, we're going to go hardcore coffee, straight, we're going to be getting up, we're going to be going, and we're going to be making things happen?
That sums it up, no doubt about it. All about getting it done. Don't wait for tomorrow. It's not guaranteed. Run out and get it done today. By the time I've had the coffee, I've already run 5 or 6 miles.
And that is literally a lot of today's podcast is going to be on. We're going to be digging into some of those principles, those disciplines that has made you very, very successful. So the audience know. Tell us a little bit what it is that you've done and why have you done it?
What have I done and why have I done it? Well, I've done a lot of things. Most recently, I was the CEO and chairman of a public real estate company. I'm still chairman of that company. Separately, I'm a partner of a development business. Separate from that, I have written a book and I'm spending a considerable amount of time and energy now spreading the message around the book. I'm traveling around the country on what I call the happiness tour, spreading the principles of the book, which is called The Life is Too Short Guy. So there's a couple of things that I'm working on at the moment.
Oh, exactly. And we're going to focus on the book today. That's really what is part of the happiness tour. And I do think there's a bit too much doom and gloom in the world. So anything we can add that little sprinkle of positivity into our business world is always going to massively help. But first, how did your having a successful career in real estate actually inform writing the book?
I think it was one small piece of the puzzle. The book is very much a reflection on my life philosophy. It's a reflection on lots of things that have happened to me over the course of my life and how I became who I am, but more importantly, how I can share some of this happiness, positivity, gratefulness with the world. So I'd say my career is a piece of it, but it's not the most important piece. It's just a part of who I am.
Oh, exactly. It's what I always say. We are, as an individual, we're always a magic carpet that's made up of different threads of different colours, and each of these different life experiences has built that carpet on how it flies and how it goes out to the world. That's one of my principles.
That's a great analogy.
And so let's dive into the book. Let's get in there, because that's really what we want the listeners to listen today and start taking some pragmatic help that they can implement into their business in 24 hours, or shall I say into themselves within 24 hours. Tell me the story about how you went about writing the book and how did it come about?
So for a long time now, I've wanted to write a book. It's on the long list of, I'm always looking for a new challenge. You know, I've run some marathons, I've started some businesses, and writing a book was one of the things I always wanted to do and never really figured out how to move that ball forward. It was someday I'll write a book. I'm not sure what it's going to be about. And then early on during the COVID era, I was started to work with a new executive coach. His name is Kevin. I'm a big believer in working with coaches and trainers, people to help you develop. And during the first session we had online, Kevin interviewed me. I talked a little bit about who I am, what I'm about, and then he had me do a couple of personality tests, what motivates me, what inspires me. Then the second call, we get on, and I remember exactly how he did it. He looks at me, we get on the phone, he's like, dude, you are like Mr. Life is Too Short guy. Everything's rah-rah, get it done. Today is important. And I'm like, yeah, I guess, but I never framed it that way. I never thought about it. There wasn't a persona separate from me. It's just who I am. So that night I mentioned it to my wife, and you know, I'm very grateful and lucky. I've been with my wife now since we're teenagers, or we went to high school together, and she knows me very well. And I mentioned, you know, I met this guy Kevin, and he called me the Life is Too Short guy, and here's why. And she's like, oh, that does sum you up, and maybe that's your book concept. And I'm like, book concept? What would Life is Too Short guy book be? And you know, she is considerably smarter than me, and she planted that little seed, and then she watered that little seed, and over the course of the next couple of months, she'd ask me about it. I'd write a couple of sentences, paragraphs. And then I got serious about it and started writing a book that I call The Life is Too Short Guy. And my vision from the beginning was to write a very practical, approachable, easy, and fun to read book that anyone can take principles away. So it's not a business book, very broadly applicable to business, but it's not a business book. It's not an academic book. Yes, it has some academic references, and I talk about surveys and stats, and I back up some of my beliefs, but it's not an academic book. This is a guide to living your best life.
I love it. And I love that story. It's always, because it's always fascinating how some of the closest people to you can spot the opportunities that are blind to yourself sometimes. And I have it's a bit of an English reference, but there's a comedian, Jimmy Carr, still very well known. And he has a very interesting take on this subject of perception versus being perceptive. And it's that thing of people think he's this very posh, well put together, suited and booted persona as a comedian. But actually, he is being brought up working class, Irish parents, Irish community, and that was always his identity of himself. And my always kind of thing now with business owners who are trying to be more in the public eye or trying to be a bit more on from a personal brand in their own marketing is actually understanding the difference between what you think is your personal identity and what is the perception that you're putting out there into the world. And straight away, your wife just knew, she's like, you're the life is too short guy. You're the like, get it done now guy. And obviously you would kind of know who yourself is, but as soon as somebody has told you that perception, you've gone, yeah, that is me.
That's very true. Very.
Okay, so let's get into the books. Okay, there's 10 core principles. We're not going to get into all 10 core principles. We're going to get into the best ones, the best ones that people don't talk enough about. That's why we want to get into. And the first one, because you mentioned the mentoring. I'm a big believer in mentoring. I'm a sports background. You've also run marathons as well. You got to have coaching to take you through those goals, through those challenges. Big fan. But why is it so important to not go on these challenges alone?
So the principle you're referring to, I call can't make it alone, and it's my favorite one. I hate to admit that. I don't want to offend all the other principles, but it is my favorite one. And
we all have our favorites. Don't worry.
We all have our favorites. It's like you get questioned about your favorite child, and you're like, well, depends on what day you ask me or what time of day. It is my favorite principle. And I say it's my favorite principle because I think it is one of the things we as a society are struggling the most with broadly, not any individual, but broadly. And let me talk more about that. So as you think back to the COVID era and what transpired there, many of us, for the first time, really got to experience social isolation. We really got to experience what it's like to be away from family, from friends, from social interactions, from groups and organizations we're part of. And that was, I think, an eye-opening experience for many people. But I talk about and can't make it alone. So this is one of the places in the book that I do make some academic references. Again, it is not an academic book. As soon as I hear academic book, my eyes start to glaze over. This is not an academic book. But I do talk about the Harvard study on what makes a good life, which is just an amazing study. I'd encourage anyone to take a look at it. It's a study that started in 1938, and it continues to this day. So 1938, Harvard researchers set out to determine what makes a good life. And they brought together a pool of Harvard sophomores at the time, all males, 256 of them. And then shortly thereafter, a few years later, in the early 1940s, they added a group of 456 inner city Boston area youth to broaden and diversify the pool of people that they're studying. And when you look back at this pool, there was a president of the United States in this pool, John F. Kennedy. There were 4 people that ran for the U.S. Senate. There were some that unfortunately died young, some that were lonely, some that were depressed, some that had addictions. And regardless, they set out to determine what makes a good life. Annual physical exams mental exams, surveys, observations, original participants, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. It is now going on for 85 years. So I say all that, and you're listening, and you're probably thinking, wow, there must be such complex conclusions and reams of data. Reams of data, yes. Complex conclusions, I could sum it up in a couple of sentences. What is the single most important thing for living a happy and healthy life? It's the power of social connection. And the one takeaway that I just love to talk about, especially as someone that somewhat recently crossed over the half-century mark, those at age 50 who self-identified as having the strongest social interactions, social community, self-identification, 30 years later, at age 80, physically healthiest, mentally healthiest, and happiest. The single greatest correlation of all variables, social network, happiness, and health. I mean, what's more powerful than that? So then I ask people to step back and reflect, and I would ask your listeners to do the same. You know, a lot of people start the new year or whatever in life's journey, and they set goals, right? They have resolutions or whatever the case may be. And I suspect some of your listeners started the year with a physical fitness plan. I'm going to the gym once a week. I'm going to run a certain number of miles. I'm going to have a plan and a goal. I suspect some of your listeners have a nutrition plan. I'm going to change my eating habits. I'm going to cut back on this. I'm going to add this to my diet. I'm going to try to lose weight. I'm going to try to get my cholesterol or something else to another number. I'm fairly certain all of your listeners had a business goal. They set KPIs. They know exactly where they're going and how they're going to get there. I challenge each person listening to this now to say, how many of you had a social plan when you started the year? Did you lay out, here are the people I haven't spoken to in a while that I need to reach out to. Here are the organizations that are interesting to me that I want to explore. Here are people in my life that I want to grow my relationship with. I just told you, the Harvard study has demonstrated there's no greater correlation between long-term happiness, health, and physical health and mental health, and your social network. So why not invest time, energy, and resources in strengthening your social network?
100%. So obviously that was a Harvard study by the best of the best. But if we just break it down with a bit of logic to why, this is the case. I always go back to human evolution when I'm trying to really understand us as people today, because we have this little arrogance, like, oh, we're nothing like our ancestors. We're better than our ancestors, and we're not that evolved from when we were still in our tribes, in our areas. Basically, we are as animals. We would like to be in tribes of 150 people in our little groups with the grandparents, with the brothers, the sisters, all these like close families interacting together. So that intrinsically is at our core. So when you're telling me, we thrive off social connection and social network if we've got a really tight group, it makes complete sense when we just go back to the science. And then if you really want to see it in practically happening, who are the people that are being the centurions? Who are the people who are living to over 100? And I'm talking about the little pockets in the Mediterranean, in Japan, and everything like that, where we have these different groups of concentrated people going over past the 100 mark. And shockingly enough, they're the ones with nature. They have a very incredibly tight social network. They eat the right foods, the vegetables, sun, and then the very last important thing, they've actually built up their thigh strength. So their thigh strength in order to have mobility. So they're still able to walk around to be able to then carry on, like you said, having that social network. As soon as they obviously lose their ability to walk, that's when they struggle to have the social network, and so on and so forth. But all of these different principles just click into place of like, well, this seems obvious. If you ever, let's bring it back to like ourselves, or if you I always like to really contextualize all of this so people can visualize. if you've ever had your bestest friend live in an incredibly close proximity to you, and suddenly that really good close friend moves away to a different town or different city, how do you feel? I'm gonna say not great, compared to just having that ability to have somebody of a very close nature nearby or close by. And then we could even spiral this again to the big trend that's coming out at the moment for business owners. It's what's the most important thing for your business, and it's actually who do you marry, who do you partner with, because again, that's your closest friend, that's your social network, that's your social connection, and so on and so forth. So I can understand why this is your favorite child. This is your favorite, because you have to just spiel it off for 5 minutes and it's like, well, this just makes perfect sense. And
it's so easy to implement, right? One of the things I said at the outset is one of my goals is to make this very simple. This isn't theoretical, academic sort of noise. It's exactly like you said. It makes a lot of sense. So I challenge everyone listening to this today to send out one extra text tonight, to call somebody, to reach out to somebody, to say hello to a stranger that you pass on the street. It's all about the power of social connection. Everyone doesn't have to be your best friend. Also, by the way, I'm not suggesting just go out and have a broad sort of, create a social media platform and have a lot of Facebook friends or a lot of likes like that. That's not it. In fact, I think that has created some of the problems that we have today because people hide behind that. Go out and embrace in social interactions. Reach out and do something today as a result of listening to this.
Perfect. You beat me to it, because I always like to ask, what's that one small thing that takes 2 minutes that you could do on a daily basis that would basically put you in the good positive direction towards hitting this? I'm going to call it KPI. I'm going to keep it going. I'm going to keep it business language orientated. We're going to call it a KPI of increasing your social network, increasing that social connection. So you said text, you said call.
Text, call, email, just reach out. Let me give you a real example, right? This morning I literally woke up and I spoke to a friend a week or two ago who was going on vacation this week, and he was going someplace that I love, and I gave him some background on what to do there and what to see there. I woke up this morning, I'm like, I wonder how Rob's doing on his vacation. 10 seconds, text, hey bud, how are things going? I hope you're having fun. Anything I can do to be helpful? I don't even think it took 10 seconds. Maybe it took 7 seconds, and I've strengthened that relationship. A couple of minutes after that, I sent an email to somebody I know that is involved in a business negotiation, trying to figure some things out. We spoke, I think it was last week or the week before, and I just sent a quick, it was actually an email saying, hey, how are things going with that negotiation? What's going on? Separate from that, this morning I called a friend of mine who I know is going on vacation with his family tomorrow. So there are 3 things I did early this morning to invest in my social network. And by the way, I really care about it. It wasn't a check the box. Hey, ask Rob about vacation. Check. Ask Brian tell Brian have fun on vacation. Check. Ask so-and-so about their. No, I really actually care. And this is how you create a habit of growing and strengthening your social networks.
I love those examples because, like you said, they aren't these massive, huge tasks. And I did it exactly myself. Like, I've got a friend who I normally train with on a Saturday. He's not been around for the last 3 weeks because I know he's hurt his knee and he actually needs to go through some rehab. And it's like, when I got to the 3rd Saturday, I was like, I'm going to give him a text. I'm going to give him a text. And I literally it was the funniest thing. You just check in and go, hey, not dead yet? And it's just something just to make him laugh and a bit fun, rather than people constantly asking him about his knee. I'm just like, dude, he's still alive. Like, it can be
loved, right? It made him feel appreciated. It made him, like you were thinking about it. And let me give you one more example. And I think about it. I did a 4th thing this morning. Yesterday was some horrific events at a university down in Florida. I know someone who's a teacher there. This morning, I shot her an email. Hey, just checking in. How you doing? She was so grateful that somebody reached out and was thinking about her. It took a few seconds and boom.
Oh, great. Yeah, I love it. So when we move on to a couple of the other core principles, doesn't segue too nicely, but I'm going to go there anyway. Laughter and fun. We're having some fun. We're having some laughter. But why is that so important to have some level of laughter and fun in our daily life? And it seems so obvious, but actually, if we reflect sometimes on our weeks, it can be really sparse. It can be really lacking without some conscious effort. But why is it so important?
From there to here, from here to there, funny things are everywhere. said the great Dr. Seuss. The principle that I talk about is funny things are everywhere. That's the name of the principle. And I tell people to laugh every day. Laugh at yourself, laugh at the world around you, laugh at your friends, laugh with your friends. Find humor. You could bring humor into every situation. There's always an opportunity to change the dynamic in the room, to change the way people view things. I have brought humor into litigation matters. I've brought humor into boardrooms. I've brought humor into negotiations. I brought humor into funerals. I've brought humor. My father passed away 18 years ago last month, and one of the hardest things I ever did was one the day he passed away to the day of his funeral. So I think back to his funeral, and I'm in the back room with my brother and our immediate family, and I could hear in the background the guests arriving for the service in the front of the funeral home, and we're overlooking my dad. Like, this is the last time we're ever going to see Dad, and it was a very emotional, difficult time for the few of us that were in the room, and everyone's crying, and you have this realization this is the last memory you're going to have with him. And as I'm standing there and I'm looking down, my phone rings. And the immediate reaction, I think, for most people is how inappropriate, how disrespectful, how I reached into my pocket, I grabbed the phone out. Again, we're hysterical crying. I'm like, Dad, how you doing? What are you up to these days? And there was a second or two of pause where people were like, what? And then everyone just started laughing. And to this day, we can all remember our last memory with Dad, a very difficult time, was one of humor and levity. And it changes in the brain, and the way we associate that moment is a funny moment. You can bring laughter and humor into every context.
I'm going to let that sit, because that is an incredibly powerful story, and I think a lot of people would resonate with. Everybody's been in that dark place, and that's where I want to go. Actually, I want to go to those darker places and moments, because when things are lighthearted, when everybody's in a good mood, it's very much easier, like you said, to fire off a few jokes here, there, have that banter, camaraderie with people. But it is the darker times that we need the humour the most, and to, like you said, put a different perspective on that memory, on that moment. I've also got a few good memories from funerals. A recent, actually, athletics coach who was basically like my second dad growing up, kind of thing. And I'm not gonna lie, it was the funniest funeral you'd ever been to. And even though a lot of his ex-athletes, including myself, turned up, and we were bawling our eyes out, as you do. But it was so funny because he was so funny.
It's great.
Because it was so funny just because we were retelling his stories, my coach's stories. And actually now I look back on it, and all I remember is just the stories of people talk like even though we were a whole group of people, we didn't know each other, but we all had the same story. We all had the same thing about Bob. But that's the I've started to use the temperature check of the room, of the energy that it's happening. And so I like the use of the litigation that you were just saying about as well, because at the end of the day, you're going through a litigation, it's going through a high stressful thing. It's negotiation, really, at its core. If we just take the litigation part out, the legal bits, it is negotiation. And the negotiations, the stakes are pretty high, and so the stress levels are also pretty high. If you're within a room where you've got to do a negotiation and stress levels are high, people aren't that great at changing their mind. They're not that great at collaboration because they're in fight or flight mode. I don't know if you've ever read the book Never Split the Difference, Chris Voss, FBI. Of course, absolutely one of my top favourite books. He has his tools and techniques. Obviously, he goes through that book to how then, in a tough negotiation situation, how do you get people onto your side? But I love how, with your introduction of actually, by adding some humour into the room, it changes the energy, it changes the temperature. So rather than being you against me, correct, it's now, okay, how can we work together in order to come to a common goal? And that is how you then end up winning bigger business deals. at the end of the day. Now,
Well
correct me
said.
if I'm wrong, but that
No,
was
no,
my
well said.
interpretation.
You summed it up well, 100%. Funny things are everywhere. That's the principle, and you can bring humor into every situation.
But is there, now I'm like you, I will use any opportunity to try and put a joke anywhere, even in the most inappropriate situations. But is there a time where it is inappropriate, it just doesn't work? What's the flip side, basically?
So I think there's always an opportunity for humor. It's how you use the humor. So there's inappropriate humor in certain settings. You have to, as you said, I think you said take a temperature check or read the room and understand what the dynamic is. I think you could bring humor into any situation. I think humor is a common language as humans. Doesn't mean we all find the same things funny, but we all understand what humor is and how it empowers people and how it levels a playing field and it changes power dynamics in rooms. I do think there are opportunities to bring the wrong type of humor to a situation, but I think if I gave you the example that we just talked about, where you could bring humor to a funeral, I'd be hard pressed to think of too many places you couldn't bring humor to.
Well, somebody who thinks themselves, it's like, I'm going to always keep bringing back identity at the word. It's like, I'm just not a funny person, To me, I think everybody's funny. I think everybody's got a funny bone, but I believe it's a muscle. But you got to exercise that muscle. So, say this person's not exercised that muscle,
Correct.
That funny bone muscle, that too often. How can they start small? How can they start small and start to practice some of these things?
So I go to one of the other principles. So this leads us into another principle: is choose your attitude and own it. You have the ability to choose the attitude you want to bring to a situation, and I talk about the lens through which you view the world and the situation. And I give lots of business and personal examples about changing the lens. What I would suggest to people is to change the lens, bring a lens to the situation where instead of this is a tough situation, I'm not funny, bring the lens of we're all humans as an opportunity to incorporate humor here. And by the way, why do people sometimes have a reluctance to bring humor? They're afraid to take a risk. They're afraid to put themselves out there, and maybe it doesn't work, which, by the way, now we're just going to fly through all the principles. Another principle is take a chance and get it done today. Take a chance and get it done today, where I talk about how people fear, they let fear and risk creep into decisions. It's I call it the yes, but syndrome. Yes, but I don't know, today's not the day. Yes, but what if it doesn't work? Yes, but what if I'm not funny? Okay, so what's the worst that could happen? Reassess with a change in lens, the way you view the world, how you could approach situations. So I just weave together 3 or 4 principles there.
But they beautifully marry up together. Because like you said, what's the comedian's biggest fear is they stand up onto that stage
and it doesn't work.
They get crickets.
Okay.
That's actually probably maybe, I don't know if that's the best scenario, because the other scenarios, obviously, they get hecklers, they get obviously people throwing things at them. But the best communication is use the difficulty.
Correct.
And then they turn all of that into then something new, which is another muscle.
Brilliant. And that, by the way, takes us to another principle. We're just flying here all the principles, but one of the other principles is learn. Take a chance to learn something new every day. Get out of your comfort zone and change the way you think about the world with a growth mindset. So when you get up there in a comedic situation and you attempt something that doesn't work, okay, reflect on why it didn't work and come back and do it again. So there's another principle for you.
Oh, absolutely. Now let's put this into your marathon running context. I always like marathons because you can't just wake up one day and say, hey, I'm going to run a marathon. You have to start small with them and build up. You start with the 5K, then the 10, the half, and then you get to the marathon. So it does take that learning. It takes a chance. You have to actually then you got to apply that attitude with it as well.
You got it.
Marathon is just long enough where no matter how good you are, there is still a mental aspect to achieving that challenge. So on your journey to running a marathon, then how did you use these multitude of principles to then achieving that goal?
Look, I think all of them, that's the beauty of the principles. The principles are not something that I went out and tried to figure out. They are who I am. They are by definition. So as I think through the 10 principles, the foundational one is attitude is everything, the power of positivity. It's really hard to get through a difficult physical challenge like a marathon without the power of positivity and understanding sort of the world around us. The second principle is choose your attitude and own it. You have the ability every day when you wake up, and I encourage people to think about their first thought of the day, a powerful moment that sets the tone, the roadmap for where you're going. And I give an exercise for transforming your first thought of the day. It's one of the things I talk about in the book. And I run 4 or 5 days a week. I get up at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. You got to choose your attitude and own it at that time in the morning. We already talked about funny things are everywhere. And you just got to laugh at yourself and laugh at the world around you as you're training and going through this experience. I talk about another principle is minutes matter. And here I talk about understanding how you're using your minutes, being thoughtful, deliberate, proactive in choosing what you do with your minutes. And I made some very proactive choices in terms of entering a marathon, training for a marathon, completing a marathon. That's all about minutes matter. I tell I think, wonderful story that I'm happy to spend time on if you want to. One of the principles is little things make a big difference. And within that principle, I talk about the power of random acts of kindness. And in my first marathon, I was the recipient of a random act of kindness that transformed me as a person and me as a runner. And it had a meaningful impact on me. So marathon running, I think everything in life you can apply all these principles to.
Tell me, let's finish there. Let's finish on the random act of kindness because it's one of my favorites. Why did that experience have such an impact in then your outlook, your attitude, your even thought processes going forward after the experience?
Well, it shed light on human nature. It shed light on me as a runner and as a person. So here's what happened. I about 20 years ago now decided I've always been a runner, but never that serious about it. 20 years ago, I decided I want to run a marathon. So I go online, I sign up for the New York City Marathon, and there's an application process to you fill a name, address, phone number, email, all that standard boring stuff. And you get to the bottom of the application and it asks projected finishing time. How am I supposed to know what my projected finishing time is? I've never done a marathon. I've never done a half marathon. I have no idea. So 4 hours. I have no idea. I fill out 4 hours. Submit my application. I start training, and about 6 weeks later, I get an email. You've been accepted to the New York City Marathon.
Incredible.
Fired up. I'm excited. First, I just wanted to get in. Now that I got in, I just want to finish. A couple weeks go by, and my mindset shifted to, I'm going to be serious about this. I'm going to embrace this. I hired a coach. I hired a nutritionist. I went out and I trained really hard. About 6 weeks before the marathon, I ran my final tune-up training race. It was a half marathon. And I am proud to say I completed it in 87 minutes. So now I'm thinking, I'm a real runner. I'm the real deal. So I show up the day before the New York City Marathon, and at Jacob Javits Convention Center, they have the expo. This is where you pick up your race bib, which is your number. You pick up your t-shirt and some other swag. And anyway, I get there, and there's thousands of people. The adrenaline's pumping. I'm checking out the room. I figure out, I look around. I'm like, there's the last letter of my name. I go over to the table to pick up my number. And there's a lovely older woman there, probably a volunteer. And I give her my name. She asks for my ID. I give her my license. She gives me my race pack, and I say, ma'am, I hope you could help me. When I signed up, I projected 4 hours as a marathon time, which, by the way, indicates where I'll line up. But I show her my paper. I just ran an 87-minute half marathon. I think I could run a 3-hour marathon or better. I'd like to change my starting corral. And she's like, son, there's nothing I could do. I'm like, but you don't understand. I can't go out with the 4-hour runners. Like, I want to break 3 hours. If I break 3 hours, I could possibly run the prestigious Boston Marathon. I have to change my starting time. And she's like, son, I understand. I just can't help you. So then I did something that we've all done, and I'm not incredibly proud of, but I pulled out clearly you can't help me, but somebody here can. I need to speak to somebody who can help me. She'd had enough of me by now, so she points to this door, a green door in the corner of the Jacob Javits Convention Center. She says, maybe they can help you. I go in there, and this tall, lanky, runner-looking guy is in there, and I walk in with my number and my evidence of my race, and I'm ready to give my case, and I probably said 3 sentences, and He's like, just give me your bib. He stamps my bib with a Statue of Liberty stamp, and he says, you could go out with the elite club runners tomorrow. I don't know what that means, but fantastic. I show up at the base of the Verrazano Bridge on race morning. There's 40,000 energized, nervous people there. And I'm trying to figure out where I'm going to line up. And I see the lineup for the 7 hours, the 6 hours, the 5 hours. And I'm like, 4 hours, 3 hours. The elite club runners line up immediately behind the professional runners. I was within spitting distance of the professional runners. Now I'm so excited. The adrenaline's pumping. First time marathon. The gun goes off. I'm like a rabbit. So do I. First mile, 6 minutes, 30 seconds. I am crushing it. I get to mile 8, 9, 10. I'm starting to slow down and get a little tired. I get to the halfway point and I see this image. I hear this little voice. The image, you remember that little old lady we just talked about from Javits? Well, I see her over my head and I hear, I told you so. Let's just say the second half of the marathon did not go as well. I got to mile 18, 19, 20, and I was in agony. I just wanted to finish. I get into Central Park at mile 24, and I collapse. I fall to the ground in complete agony. My muscles are so seized and cramping. My calf muscle literally spun around the front of my shin. I didn't know that was possible. I'm pounding on my calf muscle, and somebody taps me on the back. Hey, are you okay? I don't remember what I said, but it was some series of noises and grunts that basically said, I'm dying. This gentleman said, you're just cramping. He then came around the front of me. Remember, this mile 24, I am disgusting. He puts his hands under my armpits, lifts me up and looks at me and says, you're just cramping. We're going to finish this. He then put his arm around me, and together we shuffled over the last 2 miles. I've no idea who he is, never seen him since. But for him, I would have never finished that marathon, and I probably would have never tried again. I went on to subsequent to that, run 15 more marathons. I qualified for Boston 3 times. I've done an Ironman triathlon. That's the power of a random act of kindness.
Wow. That incredible that you still don't know who he is. He's just out there. I had no idea, absolutely no idea in the impact. And I think that's also the second message from this is when you're doing these random acts of kindness, is not seeking the results or even the outcome, just I always call it like a skimming stone, just skim that stone, let the ripples go out. Beautiful. And just keep skimming that stone. And at some point it will come back to you in the weirdest and most wonderful way, and I'm sure you've probably experienced that, because then of that one experience, you've then put out more random acts of kindness than you would have probably done beforehand, and then so forth. You've probably impacted, let's say 15 people, 10 people, no doubt, and then let's say 5 of them really take it to heart, and then they also do another 5, and then another 5 on top of that, and before you know it, the ripple effect of compounding. Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. So we'll kind of come to the close, because I want to finish there. I want to finish on that beautiful story, but I want to just to let people know about your very last principle. Live today, because tomorrow is not guaranteed.
Live today, don't wait for tomorrow. Here I take people on a journey, and I ask people, I ask them to close their eyes, and we walk through a field, and it's a beautiful day, and we see something sticking out in the distance. It's a piece of granite, and on that granite, I tell them, that's your name. You're now looking down at your tombstone. And I ask people to self-reflect and think for a minute. What are the 3 or 4 words that you're going to put under your name to reflect your life forever? And once you've figured that out, I ask people to take a step back and think about their eulogy. This is for the people that show up to pay their respects, that knew you, loved you. What are the 3 or 4 themes you would want reflected in your eulogy? And then I ask people to take one more step back and tell them to think about their obituary. This is for the people that never met you. What are the 3 or 4 sentences you would want the world to know about you that they don't that they've never met you before. So 3 or 4 sentences for your obituary, 3 or 4 themes for your eulogy, 3 or 4 words for your tombstone. I ask people to write that down and then stare at it and look up at the mirror and ask, is this the life I'm living? And if not, today's the day to go out and make that change. And I leave people with this final thought. I say, your tombstone will have 2 dates on it. What's most important? The dash in between. What story will you write beginning today?
On that note, where, Scott, can people go and dig more into all of these 10 core principles and read more about your book? Where can they go find it? Where can they buy it? Where can they reach you? How can people get their hands on it?
Wonderful. The best way to find me is at my website, lifeistooshortguy.com. Lifeistooshortguy.com. You can find the book. You could sign up to get the principles. You could sign up for the newsletter. You can find out more about my speaking platform as I'm touring the country now, as I said, on the Happiness Tour, meeting with companies, teams, conferences to talk about these principles and empower people to live their very best lives.
Amazing. Everybody, please do go check out. We've only skimmed the surface of just like the very top level of everything that's in the book. So I would absolutely implore everybody to go deep dive more into it. And it's one of the best things about this book is you can reread it, and as you grow and develop, you can reread it again and get a different perspective. And it certainly is the book that just keeps giving on giving over time as well. So Scott, thank you so much for your time today. I've really enjoyed it. If you've really enjoyed it, and I'll speak to you again very soon.